Okay, so for this video, we're going to look at the depths of reading data now. So if we go back to our SQL Server class here, we're going to want to make a new method here that's going to be for reading data. This one can be a little bit more complex in a sense than the others from what we've got so far, and this is why I've left this one for last. However, it's probably the most important one on this list here. So you're going to want to know how to do this easily. So what we'll do is first just make a private, and what you'll want from this is to return a 2D array. I found is the easiest way to do this. So if we do a string, 2D string array, and let's call it read data. And similar to the last ones, we want a string of database. We then want a string of table. And again, these aren't exactly needed, this string of database and string of table. You could just use the ones that are defined up here once you've defined them. But if you want to access a different table or a different database under the same login, then you'll want this. And I kind of want to leave that option open for the future in case I do want to. So let's now do another string array, and we're going to have this as columns, and another string array. Sorry, no, not a string array, an integer. And we're going to have this as index. So this will be the index of where you read the data. Now, if you want to read all the data on the list, we can have it so on the index of -1, or maybe 0, on the index of -1, it just reads all the data. Whereas on the index of 0, it reads only the index of 0. So it's kind of like a read where in a sense, but we're going to look at reading where after this. So first let's start with this. So let's make a, let's do a try catch here, and do message box.show failed to read data. Okay, and now as normal we're going to open a connection, so con.open, let's do com.connection equals com. And from here we're now going to do something slightly different. So let's do so for the command text, let's put this as command text first. Let's start with that. And we're going to want to do, for reading, we want to do select. So it selects the value at a certain index. So select. And you're going to want to do columns, but at the moment, let's just leave that as this, because we'll look at that in a second. And then we're going to do from. And then, as normal, we'll do from the database and the table. So let's just copy that into here. So this will select the values at a certain point. So it will select it and kind of keep it as a selected part that it will then look at individually. So from here, we want to do all the columns themselves. So let's make a method similar to the arrays to string. However, we don't want to equal values. We just want the columns themselves. So I have one here at the moment we can use, and if you want, you can do a different one, or you can copy this down. And let's just keep this here, and then we can do, all it does is it makes, oh, what's this? Okay, it doesn't like that. Let's do column, column, column. No. Let's change that. Let's do column names up here instead as the array. Or not columns names, sorry. Column names, there we go. And all that will do is it will make a blank string, not as null, but just as no value, for, blank. And then it will go for each column, and similar to this method, it will just concatenate each column with a comma in between, and each column is surrounded in square brackets again, as I've said before, so as for if there's a space in the column name, it still recognizes that column name and not as two column names. Okay? So now here, once we've got this method, we want to put columns in here. So that will be this string named columns. So that will select those columns from the table in the database. And now we're going to want to actually make a reader in a sense. So we want to make a reader for the values. So if we're doing if we're doing not a specific index, so we can do SQL reader or SQL data reader, sorry, and let's name this. So it's making a new instance of it. So let's name this reader, and let's equal that to com.execute reader. Okay, so that makes a new SQL data reader from the executed reader using this command text. And now we want to do if, and then let's do specific index is equal to 0. So this is equal. So if this is doing if, let's say the index is 0, and we want to do this will read a certain line. Okay. Sorry, no, this will read all the lines. Yes, this will read all the lines. Sorry. And now we want to make a new integer, and let's just have this as a random value. Let's say z, and equal that to 0 for now. And now this is the important part with the reader. You cannot read data unless you do reader.read. So that means it's actually going to try and read now. Otherwise you can't read the data. So reader, so we want to do while reader.read is true in a sense. So that you could do equals to true. Oh, not that. However, you can just leave it as if reader.read because that is automatically looking for when that's true. So while that is true, so basically while there is text there that or information it can read, let's do a for loop for column names.length. And now we want to check that, so we want to do a switch statement. Now, this is where it can, let's remove that for a moment, and let's go back up to here. And up here, we want to change some bits around, and we want to make a temporary array in a sense. Let's do a string array, and that's just going to be data or information or info. And let's make a new string array, and let's just give it some random size, just a random size for now. Big enough that there won't be any problems. And you could use a count method here if you wanted, but let's just go with that for now. And now we want to look at going through each iteration, and we want to do a switch. So this is where things can get a little weird in a sense, in that when you're reading the data, you need to be able to define it to a specific type. Now, you can do this as a var, or variable. However, if you want to do this a different way, you can do it with a switch statement for each case. So this can be done for, what you can do is do a switch statement on the type. So reader.getType, and you want to do the index column, or the column index, and then .toString. And now you could do all the different, get data type name, and now you can do a case for an integer and convert it from a integer to a string. You could do it for a different bit, or you could do data. You could do a variable and do this as just a variable of name info equals reader dot, and this is the part where the switch statement could come in handy, because you need to read the type. So if you look down this list, you'll see You can get the boolean, you can get a boolean, get a byte, get bytes, get chars, get decimals, doubles. So it's a certain method to read the data in there. So this is when a switch statement is a bit better. If we do a switch statement again, there we go. So change it back to a switch statement, and let's say we want to do a case of an integer. So we can just do data to the z comma I, because that's the different rows and columns, equal to reader dot, and then for this case it's an integer, so let's do get int, and let's do int 32, and then we're doing the specific index, or the column index, which is I, and then dot to string. So that will read each column individually and iterate through each bit individually here. And then we'll just do a break there. There we go. And that's how you're going to do every case for each one. There could be more efficient methods, but I found this works very well for this. It just depends what values or data types you have in here. So let's first also put in a default. There we go. And we'll just do a default, and it will just do message box show. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Show unable to read data type, and then we could do an actual data type here. So let's do reader dot get data type string. There we go. So it will tell you what data type, so you can add it now if you want. And let's break that. Okay. Now let's make a few more. So let's say you don't just have integers being stored in this table. So let's do chart. There we go. And this works for whatever length this is. So it could be maximum, so it could be max, it could be 50, or it could be smaller. It will work because it's just a data type. And then let's also do the case for a bit, which is same method again. And let's also do the case for money as well. Or actually, no, let's leave that for now, because we don't need money in this case. But we might need a bit for truth, because a bit is a true-false in a sense. It's a boolean, but for SQL in a sense. So it gets a binary bit of either a 1 or a 0, which can be used as true or false in this case. So once you have that, you want to down here, down here, you'll want to put, there, z++, and all that's going to do is increase z by 1, so it can iterate through it. So this will do each actual value. So once we have this, oh wait, that's outside of that. There we go. So this will do for each line that's there, or for each column. So now what we can do is do an else statement. So if index is not equal to 0. And again, we need to do a way to do reader.read. However, we don't want to do a while function to read all of them. Instead, we want to do an if function. Oh, read. There we go. And we want to read the data. So this is if there's data, basically. It will be true, and that will then read it. And then we can do a for loop again for all the columns. And then we can do data to the 0, I. So this is for a specific index of data. Equals reader dot get string. And then to the I. So again, you'll still have the same case here that you might need to change that from just a string, because you do get string before for doing an varchar, which actually I need to change here because that's still an int32. I've just realised. So let's change that so it actually reads this correctly. So let's do data to the z comma I is equal to reader dot get string. Also, there's nothing to say you can't implement this method into this, in a sense. So instead of doing a while, it can change it and you can use this same method. However, for the moment, since it's a bit harder to do that, I've left it as this, but that can easily be changed and implemented in a different way. You can write this however you want. All this does is it reads the data as a certain type here. So it either gets the string, gets an integer, gets a binary, however you've got it, gets a small money, gets a large money, that kind of thing, and then turns it to a string to be readable. This could be turned to an integer, could be turned to a boolean. I've just got it all in one method, just of read data at the moment, to make it so you can easily call that, get it as a string, and then you can convert it back again if need be. And then it depends on your situation of how you're using it. I'm just trying to make an all-around method that works generally. So if we do now after this, and you can do an if statement to check if it's null or not. So if we do, but we can leave that out for now, actually. So once you've got all this, we want to, on the outside here, because we don't want to forget to close it again, because don't forget we've opened it up here, but we still need to close this entry. So, or sorry, this connection. So we do con.close. And we also want to close the reader as well, so reader.close. And you want to close the reader before you close the connection, sorry. And now we can return data. Now, this returns the string array. However, we still have a problem at the moment that this all works fine, or should work nice and fine. Yes, okay, if we just put return in here. There we go, because if it run the catch statement, there's no return. And let's return data, and then put data outside here, outside the try catch. There we go. So we still have a small problem at the moment, though. We're changing those values, and then we're returning the data, or the data array. But we still have the array being the size of 1,000 by 1,000 at the moment, which isn't the best, because then if you go to iterate it through it later, unless you check if it's null or not, you're going to be checking for 1,000 by 1,000 values. So this bit's optional, or whether you want to do that or not, but you can just easily make a way to just clean that up. So if it's equal to blank or null, it would then just make a new array of a certain length and return that. So if I've just got a little method here, which I've just called cleaner in a sense, which just cleans up that array a bit. And it takes in an array, 2D array, and then spits back out a 2D array. I've just given it underscore data as a temporary array, and it just cleans that up to be so there's no blank columns and rows here. This could also be done with a list in a sense, but I haven't done that. I've done it with an array for the moment. So now if we go back to here, we want to comment out that bit we did last time. And let's say we want to read a data value, and we want to do, well, let's first get an array. So let's do a string and then 2D array and have it as data, and equal that to server.read data. Wait, that's private. That's meant to be public. Everyone else probably noticed that ages ago, but there we go, read data. And then server.database and server.table name. And then we want to do columns and values. And now let's read all the data in the table. So let's do 0. Now this probably would be better to use as -1. At the moment I've just got it as 0. Let's change this to -1 instead. Because of course the index of 0 is a value. So let's have this as -1. And No overload for the method. It takes 5 arguments, table name. Sorry. We don't need values. My bad. I'm getting used to doing it on all the others now. So, now we have a data, or we should get a data array called, well, an array here called data with all the information from that table. So let's do message box.show and check if this works. So if we go back to this, we'll get something similar to this. So let's do just the value of 1 1. Let's say so the index is of 1 1. So let's do data 1, 1. There we go. And let's run this. And you'll see the value is 1. So if we look over here, let's look for 1, 1, and it should be the value of 1. Let's have a look. So if we change that to 1, 2, we get blank. Okay, so I've realised the problem that we were having. We forgot to change the columns here. So let's add in here, bit confused before, ID into there, and that will fix everything. So now we've got ID, full name, and class ID, because don't forget we are reading whatever columns are in this array that we're inputting into here. So before I had it as full name and class ID, so I was a bit confused when it wasn't reading the right indexes, but now it's all okay. So now if we run this and we do 0, 0, we should get the number of 1 coming back here. So let's run this, and we get the integer of 1. So now if we look at doing, let's say 0, 1, we should get James Markson as the value that comes back. And there we go, James Markson. So now let's look at trying to read Iris Watson. So that'll be 1, 1. So let's shrink that down. 1, 1. And we get Iris Watson. And there we go. So we can then read from a certain index. So let's read from the index of 1. And this should work. So if we do 0 now, because there's only going to be 1 column in this database, in this data array, and then let's do 0, 1, and we should get Iris Watson, I'm pretty sure. No, failed to read data, which means it couldn't read the value that was there. So if we look back, okay, so I've made a slight change now, and instead of reading from a certain index, it's going to be slightly different, and I'm going to instead go over in the next video of reading from a certain condition, so where something is something else. So for the moment, I've deleted all that bit from reading from a certain index, as actually it wasn't needed looking at it in the grand scheme of things in comparison to reading from a certain point in a condition, as there's an ID instead of index now, and we can look at that. So that'll be it for this video, and in the next one I'm going to go over reading from a reading where a condition is met.